Yes, by very, very, very popular demand, here it is. Creature Comforts, Aardman's fourth most iconic franchise behind Wallace and Gromit, Shaun the Sheep and Morph, and the review that everyone wanted to see last year, but I didn't do it because it wasn't a movie! But I digress. This was actually the first production that Nick Park worked on after officially joining Aardman. Since The Grand Day Out was done in conjunction with Aardman, Nick Park made it as a student project and got Aardman to assist him, which is what got him the job at Aardman. Creature Comforts is a brilliantly simple concept that is also remarkably versatile, and it all starts from its origin, that being the original short film. The first episode of Creature Comforts was actually part of a short film series made by Aardman and commissioned by Channel 4 called Lip Sync, of which the premise was that Aardman took a bunch of audio from various interviews by British people about their daily lives and had animation put over it, or in one case a conceptual short film about Shakespeare, or also being the origin of a character who I'll also be taking a look at later this month. All the films had the traditional Aardman sense of charm, but most of them were quite boring and a little creepy, though admittedly looking at them today feels like uncovering an ancient painting, looking into the past and seeing something so aged and also so odd. It's quite intriguing, but on their own they're quite naff. However, Nick Park had the brilliant idea that for his contribution, he would make the interviewees look like animals, and from there Creature Comforts was born. And it is a great testament to the proof that even the most boring and limp concept can be made interesting and funny just by the right amount of imagination and animation. The original short film is hilarious, mostly because Nick chose the perfect interviews and matched them with the perfect animals, such as the cougar has the voice of a Brazilian immigrant complaining about how cold, wet and miserable it is compared to his home country.
If you try to compare the situations and the environment that you live here with the environment that you live in Brazil, there is a big difference. Here you live in a very small place.
Or the family of polar bears with the son that constantly says awkward things that match with the animals they are perfectly.
My favourite food is, I'm afraid to say, steak. I go a long way to go and get a nice steak.
Do you like lions as well then? Do you like steaks and chips with lions with it?
Not with lions, Andrew. No, I don't like lion steak.
The short also really made Park step up his game in terms of animation, and while most of the animals in question remain quite stationary, that actually works to its advantage because it gives Park the chance to focus more on the facial expressions rather than having to focus on the body movements of the models, which if you watch A Grand Day Out, you can see how Park's attempts to focus on both resulted in the animation looking a bit clunky. Whereas here, since most of the movement comes from the creature's faces and hands and nothing else, it looks so much more polished and fluent. Plus, this is also where Park started to experiment more with his now trademark character look with wide faces and big round eyes. Plus, his lip syncing is brilliantly done, appropriately enough. And when you first find out that these interviews are genuine from behind the scenes, it just makes the humour and the creative genius all the more apparent and brilliant. It also works as a concept because since these creatures are being interviewed, it makes the fact that they're not moving that much make all the more sense. And it's also funny to see these kinds of animals talking like middle-aged Midlanders complaining about their council houses. Despite how much of a big hit the short was, it was 14 years before Aardman decided to make an actual series based around the idea, though there were some electric company ads made in the Creature Comfort style a year after the original short film, but the TV show and the original short film is the version that everyone is aware of and loves. The issue with the TV show though is that because they have more time they need to fill, they need more interviews in order to make the animations for, and since doing a really good interview is like catching lightning in a jar, in Death Valley, naturally some of the interviews they chose for the TV series weren't as funny or interesting as the short film. But the show is still a lot of fun, and even with the interviews not being as funny, the animation is still a joy to look at, though I have noticed a few times in the group interviews that they forgot which animal has which voice. Like if you look closely at this interview with the chickens, you'll see that the one on the far left and the one on the middle right switch voices.
Teamwork. That's one thing about it I like. I wouldn't like to work on my own.
It's over 100, isn't it?
Well, it used to be more than 200.
We've lost quite a few.
Because we're all getting older now, look.
The TV version also adds more gags in the animation itself, which I'm all for, and it does add a new level to the show, and make it seem less like a stop-motion version of Walking Life, which, just a word here from an animation guru, don't watch that movie, it's boring as hell. The show also added a few more rehearsed interviews, which I'm very much against, since it takes the genuosity out of the concept, but a lot of the time you can't tell which of the whether ones are staged and which ones are real, so it's not really that big of an issue, and thankfully the episodes only last 10 minutes, so they don't overextend the series any longer than it needs to be. There is also an American version of Creature Comforts, and I'll admit it's okay, but something about the animation style and just how the English version picked the most perfectly dull, awkward, or just plain weird people to interview really makes the whole thing come together. And the American version doesn't work in the same way, since the animation style really doesn't fit with those kinds of accents, and the interviews this time are either too generic or too specific. The great thing about Creature Comforts is that the interviews blur the line between seeming like something the animal in question would say about themselves and their lives, but also being something that you could genuinely see a regular person saying about themselves too. The American version has interviews that either seem like you can see the person who's giving the interview in your mind, but you can't sync it up with the animal.
So, I kind of look like Beyonce. With a Monique shape.
Or the opposite problem, where you can't imagine the human saying what the animal said.
Well, I'll tell you something. If you live in the Great Plains as long as I have, you'll have respect for winters. They'll come and haunt you, especially if you're not prepared for them.
But in the end, Creature Comforts is a great concept, and by and large has more in its franchise that is funny and entertaining than those that are not. So I can understand why everyone wanted to see this last year, because there's really nothing else like it in the world. But then again, that sums up a lot of what Aardman makes anyway, and that still holds true with what we'll be looking at next time.